Laughter echoed through the crystal chandelier dining room of Chicago's most exclusive restaurant, sharp and cruel. The target was a waitress whose uniform stretched tight across her heavy, unapologetically fat figure. The mocking whispers were loud enough for the entire room to hear, a cruel symphony of high society bullying. But the snickers died instantly when the heavy oak doors swung open, and the city's most feared underworld figure bypassed the elite crowd, walking straight toward her with undeniable purpose. The Gilded Lily was the kind of establishment where a single appetizer cost more than most people's weekly groceries, and the clientele practically breathed old money and entitlement. The air was thick with the scent of white truffles, aged Bordeaux, and designer perfumes that cost thousands of dollars an ounce. It was a place designed for the slender, the wealthy, and the ruthless. Beatrice Gallagher did not fit into any of those categories. Beatrice was a fat woman in a world that demanded shrinking. Her body was soft, broad, and heavy, taking up space in a society that preferred women like her to be invisible. The standard uniform of the Gilded Lily. A crisp white button-down shirt, tucked into a high-waisted black pencil skirt, was clearly designed for women who possessed a fraction of her mass. On Beatrice, the fabric pulled taut across her wide hips and thick waist, the buttons of her blouse straining against her full bust. Her thighs rubbed together painfully with every hurried step she took across the polished marble floors, the physical toll of her grueling shifts matched only by the emotional exhaustion of enduring constant, suffocating judgment. She wasn't oblivious to the stares. She knew exactly what the wealthy patrons and her slender, cruel co-workers saw when they looked at her. They saw a punchline. "Table 4 needs more water, B. Try not to cause an earthquake on your way over," whispered Cassidy Brooks, the restaurant's unofficial head waitress. Cassidy was a vision of sample-size perfection, with sharp cheekbones and a sneer that she wore like a luxury accessory. She bumped her shoulder roughly against Beatrice's as they crossed paths near the service station, causing Beatrice to stumble slightly, the heavy silver pitcher in her hands, sloshing ice water onto the pristine cuffs of her uniform. "Careful," Cassidy added, with a fake saccharine pout, her voice carrying just enough for a nearby table of venture capitalists to hear. "We wouldn't want you slipping. It might take a crane to get you back up." A chorus of muffled laughter erupted from the patrons. Beatrice felt the familiar, hot sting of humiliation crawl up the back of her neck, turning her cheeks a violent shade of crimson. She gripped the handle of the water pitcher tighter, her knuckles turning white. She didn't say a word. She couldn't. Her mother, Margaret, was sitting in a sterile room at Chicago General Hospital, relying on an experimental treatment for a failing liver that Beatrice's meager insurance barely covered. Every tip, every grueling hour in this gilded cage was a drop in the bucket of a crushing mountain of medical debt. She swallowed her pride, just as she always did, and kept walking. But the night was determined to break her. As Beatrice approached a corner booth occupied by a group of young trust fund socialites, disaster struck. A sleek, patent leather stiletto, belonging to a woman named Victoria, whose father practically owned the city's real estate market, deliberately slid out into the aisle. Beatrice, balancing a massive tray laden with plates of seared scallops and braised lamb, didn't see the obstacle until it was too late. Her heavy work shoe caught the heel. The laws of physics took over. Beatrice went down hard, the tray flying from her grasp. a cacophony of shattering porcelain, clattering silverware, and splashing saucers, echoed like a bomb going off in the hushed, elegant dining room. Beatrice hit the floor with a painful thud, her knees taking the brunt of the impact, while a generous portion of red wine reduction splattered across her crisp white shirt, looking horribly like blood. Dead silence fell over the room for a fraction of a second, immediately followed by an uproar of mocking laughter. "Oh my God, did you feel the floor shake?" one of the socialites gasped, covering her mouth as she giggled into her companion's shoulder. "I think the poor dear needs a wider aisle," Victoria drawled, not even bothering to hide her malicious smirk. Beatrice sat on the floor, surrounded by ruined food and broken plates. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps. The humiliation was a physical weight pressing down on her chest, suffocating her. She scrambled to her hands and knees, her large body clumsy in her panic as she tried to gather the broken shards of porcelain. "What in the name of God is going on here?" The sharp, booming voice of Braden Mitchell, the restaurant manager, cut through the laughter. Braden was a small, anxious man whose entire existence revolved around kissing the rings of the wealthy elite. He marched over to the scene of the disaster, his face contorted in absolute rage. "Gallagher, look at this mess!" Braden hissed, his voice trembling with fury. He didn't offer a hand to help her up. Instead, he stood over her, looking down with undisguised disgust. "I told you that you were too clumsy for the floor. You are a complete embarrassment to this establishment. Look at you. You're sweating, your uniform is a disaster, and you've ruined a $500 meal." "I was tripped," Beatrice whispered, her voice cracking as tears of pure frustration pricked the corners of her eyes. "Don't you dare make excuses and blame our guests!" Braden barked, stepping closer, kicking a piece of a broken plate toward her leg. "You waddle around here like you own the place, but you're nothing but a liability. Get up. Get up right now and get to the back. You're cleaning the grease traps tonight, and you can forget about your tips for the week to pay for this china." Cassidy emerged from the crowd, a damp cloth in her hand, pretending to be helpful while her eyes danced with malicious glee. "Oh, Braden, go easy on her. It's hard to find your center of gravity when there's just so much mass to balance." More laughter. The entire restaurant had paused their expensive dinners to watch the spectacle of the fat waitress being humiliated. Beatrice squeezed her eyes shut, a single tear escaping and tracking through the dusting of flour and sweat on her cheek. She felt like a wounded animal, surrounded by vultures in designer suits. She braced her hands against the cold marble floor, preparing to push her heavy frame up, preparing to retreat to the kitchen and hide her shame. But before she could rise, the heavy oak double doors at the entrance of the Gilded Lily did not just open. They were thrust apart with enough force to make the maitre d' jump out of his skin. The mocking laughter in the room died a sudden, unnatural death. It was as if someone had flipped a switch, draining the oxygen from the massive dining hall. Braden stopped his rant mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open in silent terror. Cassidy took a swift step back, her smug smile vanishing into a mask of pure panic. Standing in the entryway, flanked by 4 massive men in dark suits, was Lorenzo Romano. Romano did not just walk into a room, he commanded it. He was the undisputed head of the Romano Syndicate, a man whose name was whispered in both terrified boardrooms and blood-stained back alleys. He was a phantom of the criminal underworld, rarely seen in public, making his sudden appearance at a high society dinner spot a deeply alarming event. I was breathtakingly lethal to look at. Clad in a bespoke charcoal grey Italian suit that perfectly contoured his broad shoulders and lean, muscular frame, Lorenzo possessed an aura of predatory stillness. His dark hair was swept back, revealing a face composed of harsh angles and a faint, jagged scar that ran along his strong jawline, a remnant of a violent past that had paved his way to the top of the city's food chain. His eyes, dark and fathomless like an endless abyss, swept the silent dining room. The elite patrons of the Gilded Lily, who only moments ago had been cackling like hyenas at Beatrice's expense, now sat completely frozen, terrified to even clink a fork against a plate. Braden Mitchell, sweating profusely, smoothed his lapels and plastered on a frantic, obsequious smile. He practically tripped over himself, trying to rush forward and greet the dangerous newcomer. Mr. Romano, what an unexpected and incredible honor. We didn't have a reservation for you, but of course, we will clear the owner's private table immediately. Lorenzo didn't even look at the manager. He simply raised a single, leather-gloved hand. Immediately, one of Lorenzo's men, a hulking enforcer named Matteo, stepped forward and shoved a heavy hand against Braden's chest, pushing the manager back with enough force to send him stumbling into a neighboring table. Braden whimpered, instantly falling silent. Lorenzo's dark eyes locked onto the center of the room. He bypassed the mayor, who was nervously sipping a martini. He walked past the real estate moguls and the venture capitalists. His polished leather Oxfords clicked menacingly against the marble floor, the only sound in the dead silent restaurant. He walked straight toward the mess on the floor, straight toward the shattered plates, the spilled wine, and the trembling, heavy-set waitress still on her knees. Cassidy, standing dangerously close to Beatrice, tried to flatten herself against a pillar, her breathing shallow with fear. She watched in horror as the city's most dangerous mafia boss stopped right in front of the fat girl everyone had been mocking. Lorenzo looked down at Beatrice. Beatrice, terrified, slowly lifted her head. Her face was flushed, her hair falling out of its messy bun, and a streak of brown gravy stained her cheek. She looked like an absolute disaster, a chaotic mess of flesh and stained fabric. She braced herself, expecting the mafia boss to demand she be removed from his sight for ruining the aesthetic of the room. Instead, Lorenzo slowly dropped to one knee, right into a puddle of spilled wine, completely ruining the trousers of his $5,000 suit. The collective gasp from the room was completely audible. "Lorenzo?" Beatrice breathed out, her voice barely a whisper, carrying a tone of disbelief and familiarity. The crowd's shock deepened. She knew his name. Lorenzo reached out, his large, scarred hand gently cupping Beatrice's soft, tear-stained cheek. His thumb brushed away the streak of gravy and the single stray tear with a tenderness that completely contradicted his terrifying reputation. "Look at you, Mia Colomba," Lorenzo murmured, his deep, gravelly voice sending a shiver through the silent room. "I let you out of my sight for a month to settle family business, and you let these fucking parasites treat you like this? I can handle it, Enzo," Beatrice stammered, her hands trembling as she tried to push herself away, painfully aware of her bulk, of her stained uniform, of how wildly out of place the beautiful, terrifying mafia boss looked kneeling next to her heavy frame. "You shouldn't be here. People are looking." "Let them look," Lorenzo growled, his voice rising just enough to echo off the vaulted ceilings. His dark eyes flicked upward, glaring at the surrounding tables with such violent intent that several patrons visibly flinched. Let them look at the woman who holds the leash to the Romano family. Before Beatrice could utter another word of protest, Lorenzo's hand slid to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her messy hair. He pulled her forward, ignoring the spilled food, the dirt, and the wide-eyed audience, and crashed his lips onto hers. It wasn't a gentle, polite peck. It was a fierce, consuming, deeply territorial kiss that staked a terrifying claim. He kissed her with an aggressive passion that swallowed all her insecurities, his other hand wrapping around her thick waist, pulling her heavy body flush against his hard chest. He didn't care about her size. He possessed her with a hunger that proved he worshipped every single pound. Beatrice melted into him, a soft sob escaping her throat as she gripped the lapels of his expensive suit, anchoring herself to the only man who had ever made her feel entirely, perfectly beautiful. When Lorenzo finally broke the kiss, Beatrice was breathless, her lips swollen and her heart hammering against her ribs. Lorenzo stood up smoothly, bringing Beatrice up with him. Despite her heavy weight, he pulled her up by her waist as effortlessly as if she weighed nothing at all, tucking her firmly against his side. His arm wrapped securely around her broad shoulders, shielding her from the room. He turned his deadly gaze toward Braden, who looked as if he was about to pass out. "You," Lorenzo said, his voice deadly quiet. "Mr. Romano, I swear to you, I didn't know," Braden squeaked, his knees actually knocking together. "You had her cleaning grease traps?" Lorenzo asked, tilting his head slightly, a gesture that made his bodyguards shift their weight in anticipation of violence. "You spoke to my fiancée like she was dirt beneath your shoe?" The word fiancée dropped into the room like a live grenade. Cassidy choked on her own spit, her eyes bulging out of her head. The venture capitalists who had laughed earlier suddenly looked as though they were facing an execution squad. "A fiancé?" Victoria, the socialite who had tripped Beatrice, whispered in utter horror, realizing she had just physically assaulted the future wife of a cartel kingpin. Lorenzo's eyes snapped to Victoria. "Matteo," Lorenzo said casually, not breaking eye contact with the terrified heiress. "Find out who this woman's father is. Buy his company by tomorrow morning. Then liquidate it." "Yes, boss," Matteo grunted, pulling out a sleek black phone. Victoria burst into hysterical tears, but no one moved to comfort her. They were all too busy praying they wouldn't be next. Lorenzo turned his attention back to the manager, who was practically weeping. "As for you," Lorenzo said to Braden, his tone conversational but dripping in venom, "you are going to get down on your hands and knees right now, and you are going to lick this floor clean. If I see a single drop of wine or a crumb of food left by the time my fiancée and I exit those doors, I will have my men take you to the docks, and you will learn exactly how deep the Chicago River really is." The dark-tinted windows of the sleek, armored Maybach shielded Beatrice from the neon glow of the Chicago skyline, but nothing could shield her from the whirring storm inside her own head. She sat on the hand-stitched leather seat, her broad frame sinking into the luxurious cushions. Next to her, Lorenzo sat in silence, his sharp profile illuminated by the passing streetlights. He had shed his suit jacket, rolling up his crisp white sleeves to reveal thick forearms laced with dark, intricate tattoos and pale, ominous scars. Beatrice looked down at her lap. Her hands, rough from years of harsh dish soap and manual labor, were resting heavily on her knees. Her uniform was still stained with red wine, a grotesque purple mark spreading across her chest. "You ruined your suit," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the purr of the V12 engine. Lorenzo didn't look at her immediately. He reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a gold lighter, and flicked the flame alive before snapping it shut. "A suit can be replaced, Mia Colomba. Your dignity cannot." "I had it under control, Enzo," she lied, her voice cracking slightly. She hated how vulnerable she sounded. She hated how her heavy thighs spilled over the leather seat, how her belly pushed against the waistband of her uniform skirt. She felt grotesque, sitting next to a man who looked like he had been sculpted out of granite by a master artist. I was going to finish my shift, get my paycheck, and go home to my mother. Now I don't have a job. "You will never work in that dump again," Lorenzo said flatly, turning his dark eyes toward her. The raw intensity in his gaze made her breath catch in her throat. "In fact, you will never work for another human being for the rest of your life. Do you think I brought you into my world to watch you fetch water for spoiled trust fund babies who aren't fit to breathe the same air as you? I am a waitress, Lorenzo," Beatrice spat back, a flash of sudden anger breaking through her deep shame. "Look at me. I am a fat, poor woman with a dying mother and a mountain of medical debt. I don't belong in your world. I don't belong in the front cover of a luxury magazine, and I certainly don't belong on your arm. People were laughing tonight, Lorenzo. They weren't just laughing at me. They were laughing at you for being with me." The car suddenly swerved to the shoulder of the lakefront drive, the tires screeching softly against the wet pavement as the driver, Matteo, pulled over without a word. The glass partition was up, isolating them completely from the front seat. Lorenzo turned his entire body toward her. He didn't look angry. He looked dangerously focused. He reached across the console, his massive, heavy-ringed hand gripping her chin with a firm, unyielding pressure, forcing her to look directly into his eyes. "Let them laugh," Lorenzo growled, his deep voice vibrating in his chest. "Let every single one of those pathetic, spineless cowards laugh. I will tear out the tongue of anyone who makes you feel small, Beatrice. Do you understand me? You think your size makes you weak. You think it makes you ugly." He leaned in close, his lips brushing against her ear, his hand sliding down to rest heavily on her soft, thick waist, gripping her flesh with a desperate, hungry intensity. "I spent my whole life surrounded by fragile, hollow women made of glass and air. You are real. You are soft. You are warm. And you are mine. I want every single inch of you, Beatrice. Every pound." Beatrice's breath hitched. For 5 years, ever since she met Lorenzo, when he was just an injured man hiding in the alley behind the diner where she used to work, a man she had nursed back to health with hot soup and stolen bandages without ever asking his name, she had wondered why he kept coming back, why a criminal kingpin kept checking on a struggling waitress. She had convinced herself it was pity. Now, staring into his dark, possessive eyes, she realized the terrifying truth. It wasn't pity at all. It was an obsession. "Your mother's bills have been paid," Lorenzo added softly, his thumb tracing her lower lip. "Chicago General has moved Margaret to a private suite on the top floor. The best liver specialist in the country flew in from Johns Hopkins 2 hours ago. She is safe." Tears welled up in Beatrice's eyes, but this time they were born of overwhelming relief. "Enzo. How? Oh, that costs hundreds of thousands. It is done, he interrupted firmly. You will never worry about money again. But in exchange, Beatrice, you stay with me. The streets are getting dangerous. The commission is moving against my family, and my enemies are looking for leverage. By kissing you tonight in front of the entire city, I put a target on your back. But I also gave you my name. No one touches what belongs to Lorenzo Romano. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and flicked it open. Inside sat a blinding, emerald-cut diamond ring, surrounded by blood-red rubies resting on a thick platinum band. It was breathtaking, barbaric, and immensely valuable. You put this on, Lorenzo commanded softly, and you never take it off. Before Beatrice could answer, the car door suddenly burst open from the outside. Matteo was standing in the rain, his hand on his sidearm, his face pale. Boss, we've got a problem. The safe house in River North. It's been hit. Detective Ford and the Federal Task Force just executed a raid. They didn't find the shipment, but they found something worse. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed into slit-like daggers. What? They found the ledger, boss, Matteo stammered, casting a nervous glance at Beatrice. The old ledger. The one with your father's signatures and the Gallagher file. Beatrice froze. The air in the car suddenly felt icy cold. She looked from Matteo's panicked face to Lorenzo's suddenly rigid jaw. What Gallagher file? Beatrice asked, her voice trembling as a cold dread bloomed in the pit of her stomach. Lorenzo, what does your ledger have to do with my family? The mansion in the Gold Coast was an imposing fortress of grey stone, surrounded by wrought iron gates and guarded by men with concealed submachine guns. Lorenzo escorted Beatrice inside, his hand never leaving the small of her back. He led her past soaring marble arches and priceless oil paintings, steering her straight into a private, dimly lit study lined with leather-bound books and smelling faintly of aged scotch and cigar smoke. Sit down, Beatrice, Lorenzo said, his voice dropping into a flat, unreadable tone. I don't want to sit down, Beatrice snapped, refusing to yield to the grandeur of the room. She stood in the center of the Persian rug, her large frame trembling with a mixture of confusion and growing betrayal. What was Matteo talking about? Why does a mob ledger have a file on my family? My father was a simple mechanic who died in a hit-and-run 10 years ago. What does he have to do with the Romano syndicate? Lorenzo walked behind a massive mahogany desk, pouring himself 2 fingers of dark amber liquid. He drank it in one swift swallow, the amber liquid burning down his throat, before he finally met her fierce, demanding gaze. Your father was not just a mechanic, Beatrice, Lorenzo said quietly. He was an accountant, a very good one. And 20 years ago, he worked for my father, Carmine Romano. Beatrice felt as though the floor beneath her feet had suddenly turned into quicksand. No, that's a lie. My father ran a small auto shop on the south side, which was a front company created by the Romano family to launder money from the docks, Lorenzo corrected smoothly. He walked out from behind the desk, stopping just inches from her. Your father, Arthur Gallagher, maintained the books for my family's entire operation. I was the only man outside the bloodline who knew where every dollar was hidden, where every body was buried. Beatrice shook her head frantically, stepping back, her mind racing as memories of her childhood fractured into pieces. She remembered her father's late nights, the greasy overalls, the faint smell of copper and expensive cologne that sometimes clung to his clothes. She had always thought he was just working hard to keep the lights on. If he worked for your father, Beatrice whispered, her throat dry, then why did we end up broke? Why did my mother and I starve in a 2-bedroom apartment while my mother's health slowly deteriorated? Lorenzo closed his eyes for a brief second, a flicker of genuine pain crossing his harsh features. Because Arthur tried to do the right thing. 10 years ago, my father decided to eliminate everyone who knew too much about the syndicate's restructuring. Arthur realized what was happening. He stole the master ledger, the only piece of evidence that could put the entire Romano family away for life, and went into hiding. Beatrice's breath hitched. She remembered the night her father died. Rain pouring against the window. The police officers standing on the porch, telling her mother that Arthur's car had been rammed off the highway by an unidentified semi-truck. The driver was never found. "The hit and run," Beatrice gasped, tears spilling over her cheeks as the dark truth crashed over her. "It wasn't an accident. Your father killed him." "Yes," Lorenzo admitted, his voice cold and steady, refusing to hide behind comfortable lies. "Carmine ordered the hit. Arthur died protecting that ledger. My father searched for years to find where Arthur had hidden it, but he died of a stroke before he could ever find it. When I took over the family 3 years ago, I inherited the search." Beatrice backed away until her hips slammed against the edge of a heavy leather sofa. She looked at Lorenzo as if he were a complete stranger, a terrifying monster who had pulled her into a spider's web of blood and deceit. "You didn't find me by accident," Beatrice whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. 5 years ago, at the diner, you didn't just happen to crawl into that alley injured. You were looking for Arthur's daughter. You were looking for the ledger." Lorenzo took a slow step toward her, his dark eyes intense, burning with an unholy fire. "At first, yes. I targeted you because I believed your father had passed the location of the ledger to you or your mother. I orchestrate a scenario to get close to you. I watched you, Beatrice. I wanted to use you to secure my empire." "You monster!" Beatrice sobbed, wiping her wet face with the sleeve of her filthy uniform. "You used me! Everything! Every sweet word, every time you checked on me, every gift, it was all a lie." "It was a lie!" Lorenzo shouted, his voice echoing off the walls, startling her into silence. He closed the distance between them in 2 swift strides, grabbing her by her upper arms, his fingers digging into her soft flesh, holding her firm. "It was a cold, calculated lie, until I actually got to know you, until I watched you work 12-hour shifts with a broken shoe and a smile on your face, until I saw you feed a stray dog outside the diner with your last $5. Until I realized that despite the cruelty of the world, despite your body, despite your poverty, you had more strength and grace than any creature I had ever encountered in my miserable life." He pulled her close, forcing her heavy body against his chest, his face inches from hers, his breath hot against her skin. "I came to steal from you, Beatrice," Lorenzo growled, his voice breaking with rare emotion. "Instead, I fell on my knees for you. I don't give a damn about the ledger anymore. I don't give a damn about the police or my father's legacy. But Detective Ford has that file now. He knows who you are. The Commission knows who you are. They think you have the key to destroying my family. If you walk out of those doors tonight, you won't survive 48 hours." Before Beatrice could process his terrifying warning, the heavy mahogany doors of the study flew open. Matteo stood in the doorway, his face pale, holding a silenced pistol in his hand. "Boss," Matteo said urgently, his voice tight with alarm. "We've got a breach. It's not the feds. It's the O'Connor syndicate. Declan O'Connor is at the front gate, and he brought Detective Ford with him." Lorenzo's demeanor instantly shifted from impassioned and desperate to cold-blooded and lethal. The rare vulnerability in his dark eyes vanished in a fraction of a second, replaced by the dead, calculating stare of the Romano syndicate's ruthless head. He did not panic. He simply reached underneath the heavy mahogany desk and pulled a matte black Glock from a hidden magnetic holster, racking the slide with a sharp metallic clack that made Beatrice physically flinch. "Matteo, lock down the west wing. Drop the steel shutters on the ground floor," Lorenzo ordered, his voice clipped and entirely devoid of fear. He seamlessly swapped out the names Matteo had shouted in his panic, knowing full well that the true threats at the gate were Liam Donovan, the sadistic head of the rival Irish syndicate, and Detective Thomas Carter, the most notoriously corrupt cop on the Chicago payroll. "Do not engage unless they breach the perimeter. I want Donovan and Carter standing in the freezing rain while I figure out how the hell they bypassed the outer security grid." "Yes, boss." Matteo vanished down the hallway, the heavy doors clicking shut behind him. Beatrice stood paralyzed against the leather sofa. The reality of the situation was crashing down on her, suffocating and heavy. Gunfire, syndicates, corrupt police. She was a waitress from the South Side who struggled to pay her electric bill, and now she was trapped in a fortified mansion about to be laid siege by heavily armed men. Her chest heaved, her full breasts rising and falling rapidly under the ruined, wine-stained fabric of her uniform. Lorenzo crossed the room in 3 long strides. He didn't grab her roughly this time. Instead, his large, warm hand cupped the back of her neck, his thumb soothingly stroking the soft skin at her nape. "Breathe, Beatrice," he commanded softly, his eyes locking onto hers, demanding her focus. "Look at me. I am not going to let them touch you. But I need you to think. Carter is here because he wants the ledger to blackmail me, and Donovan wants it to destroy my family so he can take over the ports. If they know who you are, it means they tore apart your apartment tonight. Did your father leave you anything before he died? A key? A safety deposit box? A seemingly meaningless family heirloom?" Beatrice shook her head frantically, her soft cheeks flushed with panic. "No, we had nothing, Lorenzo. When he died, the bank foreclosed on our house. My mother and I had to pack whatever fit into trash bags. He didn't leave millions of dollars or a secret map. He just left. He left us." "Think," Lorenzo urged, his voice remaining terrifyingly calm, even as the distant mechanical whir of the mansion's steel security shutters, dropping into place, echoed through the walls. "A man who meticulously hides a ledger containing 2 decades of mafia blood money does not leave it to chance. He knew he was being hunted. He knew my father was going to kill him. Arthur Gallagher was a genius with numbers and hiding assets. He would have left a breadcrumb for his wife or his daughter." Tears blurred her vision. Beatrice dug her manicured nails into her thick palms, forcing her mind to race backward in time. 10 years ago, the smell of rain, her father's grease-stained hands. He had come home late, his face pale and sweating. He had hugged her mother tight, then he had walked into Beatrice's bedroom. She gasped, her eyes snapping wide open. "The music box," Beatrice whispered, the memory hitting her with the force of a freight train. "For my 16th birthday, a week before he died. He gave me a heavy vintage wooden music box. It played Clair de Lune. He told me it was the most valuable thing he owned, and that if anything ever happened to him, I needed to keep it safe. But it was broken. It never actually played music. I kept it because it was the last thing he gave me. Lorenzo's eyes flared with a dark, predatory light. "Where is it?" "It's at the hospital," Beatrice said, her voice trembling. "My mother keeps it on her bedside table. She says looking at it makes her feel close to him." Before Lorenzo could respond, the intercom on his desk crackled to life. "Boss," a gruff security voice reported through the speaker. "Carter is at the gate with a megaphone. He has an unsealed federal warrant. He says if we don't surrender Beatrice Gallagher in 5 minutes, he's authorizing a tactical breach. Donovan's men are flanking the perimeter with heavy artillery. They aren't here to arrest anyone. They're here to wipe us out." Lorenzo stared at the intercom for a long, silent moment. Then a slow, terrifying smirk spread across his scarred face. It was the smile of a predator who had just been handed the perfect excuse to hunt. "Let them try," Lorenzo murmured. He turned back to Beatrice, sliding the Glock into the waistband of his trousers. "We are leaving. We're going to Chicago General to get that music box, and then I am going to end Liam Donovan and Thomas Carter permanently." "Leaving? How?" Beatrice asked, looking toward the heavily barricaded windows. "We're surrounded." Lorenzo didn't answer. He walked over to the massive, floor-to-ceiling bookshelf on the far wall. He reached for a thick, leather-bound copy of Dante's Inferno, pulling it sharply toward him. With a deep, mechanical groan, the entire bookcase swung inward, revealing a dark, concrete tunnel illuminated by dim emergency lights. "My father was a paranoid man," Lorenzo said, offering his hand to her. "He built this estate with a subterranean tunnel that leads directly to the storm drains 3 blocks away, where I have an armored SUV permanently stationed. Come." Beatrice hesitated. She looked at the narrow, claustrophobic tunnel, then down at her own heavy, wide body. "Lorenzo, I might not fit. I'm too big for—" "Stop!" Lorenzo interrupted, his voice fiercely protective. He stepped back, framing her wide hips with both of his large hands, squeezing her soft flesh with a desperate reverence. "Do not ever apologize for your body. Do not ever look at yourself with shame. You are perfect. You take up exactly the amount of space you are meant to take up in this world, and I will tear down the walls of this house with my bare hands if I have to make a path for you. Now take my hand." Tears pricked her eyes again, but this time they were tears of fierce, undeniable devotion. She reached out, her thick fingers intertwining with his rough, scarred hand. The air inside the subterranean tunnel was damp and smelled heavily of earth and stagnant water. The concrete walls were tight, but Lorenzo had been right. Beatrice fit. She moved as quickly as her heavy body allowed, her thighs burning and her breath echoing loudly in the enclosed space. Lorenzo walked just a half step ahead of her, his grip on her hand unyielding, pulling her forward through the darkness while acting as a physical shield between her and whatever might lie ahead. Above them, the muffled, heavy thuds of a battering ram echoed through the earth. Liam Donovan and his men were breaching the mansion's outer gates. "Keep moving, Mia Colomba," Lorenzo urged softly, glancing back over his broad shoulder. Even in the dim, flickering amber light of the emergency bulbs, his eyes were entirely focused on her. He didn't look annoyed by her slower pace. He looked completely attuned to her every breath. "We are almost there." They finally reached the end of the tunnel, which opened into a massive, underground concrete bunker hidden beneath a dilapidated warehouse. Parked in the center of the room was a heavily modified, matte black Mercedes G-Wagon. It looks less like a luxury vehicle and more like a military tank. Lorenzo opened the heavy passenger door, practically lifting Beatrice into the high seat before climbing into the driver's side. The engine roared to life with a deafening, guttural growl. He hit a button on the overhead console, and a disguised garage door rattled open, revealing the rain-slicked, abandoned streets of the industrial district. He slammed his foot on the gas. The heavy SUV launched out of the bunker, its reinforced tires chewing up the wet pavement as they tore into the Chicago night, leaving the besieged mansion far behind. "Call the hospital," Lorenzo commanded, tossing a sleek, encrypted burner phone into Beatrice's lap. "Call the nurses' station on the VIP floor. Tell them to lock your mother's door from the inside and under no circumstances let anyone in, especially not the police." Beatrice scrambled to dial the number, her hands shaking so violently she dropped the phone twice into the folds of her skirt. Finally, the line connected. She delivered the message to a panicked night nurse, hanging up only when she was assured that Margaret Gallagher's suite was securely barricaded. "She's safe for now," Beatrice gasped, slumping back against the leather seat. The adrenaline was beginning to wear off, leaving her exhausted and terrified. She looked down at her ruined, filthy uniform. "Lorenzo, if Cutter and Donovan know about me, they know about my mother. They'll go to the hospital." "They won't get past my men," Lorenzo said grimly, his eyes locked on the road as he navigated the slick streets at breakneck speed. "I dispatched an elite security detail to the VIP floor the second she was admitted. But we need to get there first. We need that music box." As they sped through the neon-lit city, Beatrice closed her eyes, trying to visualize the heavy wooden box her father had handed her 10 years ago. It was ornate, carved with strange, intricate geometric patterns. "Wait!" Her eyes snapped open. The exhaustion vanished, replaced by a sudden, electric shock of realization. "Lorenzo," Beatrice breathed, sitting up straight. "The box? It's not just a box." He glanced at her, the dashboard lights casting harsh shadows across his scarred face. "What do you mean?" "My father loved puzzles," she explained rapidly, her heart pounding against her ribs. "He used to build puzzle boxes in the garage. Japanese puzzle boxes, the kind where you have to slide the wooden panels in a specific sequence to open a hidden compartment. I always thought the music box was just broken because the crank didn't turn. But what if it's not a music box at all? What if it's a puzzle box? The ledger, it's a physical book, right?" "No," Lorenzo said, his voice dropping into a low, stunned register. "In 2016, my father transferred all the syndicate's offshore accounts and blackmail files onto a highly encrypted, custom-built USB drive. We just call it the ledger because of the old days. A flash drive." Beatrice swallowed hard. A flash drive could easily fit inside the false bottom of a wooden music box. Lorenzo gripped the steering wheel so tightly, his knuckles turned stark white. For 10 years, the most powerful crime syndicates in the country had been tearing the city apart, murdering people and burning down businesses, searching for a ghost. And all along, the key to dismantling the entire criminal empire of Chicago had been sitting on a bedside table in a run-down apartment, masquerading as a broken gift from a dead father to his teenage daughter. "You are incredible," Lorenzo murmured, a profound sense of awe lacing his rough voice. He reached over the center console, resting his heavy hand on her thick thigh, his thumb drawing slow, grounding circles against her stained skirt. "Do you realize what you just did? You just outsmarted the FBI, the Romano Syndicate, and the Irish mob in a matter of seconds." "I just paid attention," Beatrice whispered, leaning into his touch, finding a strange, terrifying comfort in the presence of the Mafia Boss. "I always pay attention. It's what you do when the world decides to ignore you." Lorenzo's jaw clenched. "The world is never going to ignore you again, Beatrice. I will burn it down first." The massive, brightly lit structure of Chicago General Hospital loomed ahead in the rainy distance, but as Lorenzo swerved the G-Wagon toward the private emergency entrance, a chilling sight forced him to slam on the brakes, the heavy vehicle skidding to a violent halt in the middle of the street. Parked diagonally across the entrance, blocking the doors completely, were 3 unmarked black police cruisers. Red and blue lights flashed ominously against the wet pavement. Standing in front of the doors, flanked by heavily armed tactical officers, was Detective Thomas Carter, and in his hands he held a familiar, intricately carved wooden music box. "We're too late," Beatrice choked out, her blood turning to ice. "No," Lorenzo growled, unbuckling his seatbelt and drawing his Glock. "We are just in time." Rain hammered against the armored G-Wagon, mirroring the pounding of Beatrice's heart. Through the windshield, flashing police lights painted the wet pavement in a chaotic strobe. Detective Thomas Carter stood under the hospital awning, an arrogant smirk twisting his features as he carelessly tossed the intricately carved wooden puzzle box from hand to hand. Lorenzo did not hesitate. He kicked his door open and stepped into the torrential downpour. His Glock held casually at his side, his face a mask of lethal calm. "Stay in the car, Beatrice," Lorenzo ordered over the storm's roar, but Beatrice ignored him. For her entire life, she had made herself small, hiding in corners and letting others dictate her worth. She was done hiding. She pushed open the heavy passenger door and stepped into the freezing rain. Her ruined uniform clung to her soft, broad curves, but as she walked to stand beside the Mafia kingpin, she possessed a fierce gravity. Lorenzo glanced at her, his dark eyes flashing with profound worship. He shifted his broad body to shield her from the tactical officers flanking Carter. "Romano," Carter shouted, his voice dripping with malice. "You led us on a hell of a chase, but it ends tonight." The nurse on the VIP floor was uncooperative, but a gun to the attending physician's head opened doors quickly. "I have the ledger. Your empire is finished." "You have a wooden toy, Carter," Lorenzo replied smoothly, his voice echoing with dangerous authority. He stopped exactly 10 paces from the corrupt detective. "A toy that belongs to my fiancée. Hand it over, take your men, and I might let you live to see tomorrow." Carter barked a mocking laugh. He looked past Lorenzo, his eyes landing on Beatrice. Disgust curled his lip. "This is the mastermind holding the Romano family's leash? A fat, sloppy waitress? I thought you had higher standards, Lorenzo." "She looks like a stuffed pig." The air around Lorenzo dropped 10 degrees. The grip on his pistol tightened, knuckles turning white. He didn't yell. He simply tilted his head, his voice dropping into a dark, violent register that made the tactical officers shift their stances. "I am going to peel the skin from your face while you are still breathing," Lorenzo promised softly. Carter sneered, masking a flicker of fear. "Save the threats. I'm opening this box, taking the drive, and burning your family to ash." Carter gripped the lid and yanked. Nothing happened. He cursed and pulled harder, face turning red with exertion. The solid wood remained perfectly seamless. Frustrated, Carter raised the box above his head, preparing to smash it against the concrete. "Stop!" Beatrice's authoritative voice cut through the rain. Carter paused. "If you smash it, you destroy the drive," Beatrice lied smoothly, her mind racing as she stepped forward, heavy boots splashing in the puddles. "My father built a fail-safe. The inner compartment is lined with a glass vial of sulfuric acid. Break the wood, the vial shatters, and the drive melts into useless plastic in seconds." Carter froze, eyes darting to the box. He couldn't risk destroying his only leverage. "She's lying," Carter hissed, though uncertainty laced his tone. "Are you willing to bet your life on that, detective?" Lorenzo asked, a knowing smirk playing on his lips as he realized the brilliance of her bluff. "Only she knows the sequence. Only she can open it." Carter weighed his options, his greedy eyes fixed on the wood. He slowly lowered his arms. "Fine. She opens it. But if she tries anything, my men will put a dozen rounds into her chest." "Let her walk forward," Lorenzo commanded, taking a deliberate step back, gun still drawn. Beatrice walked toward Carter, her heart hammering. She took the heavy, wet box. The wood was cold, but the intricate grooves were intimately familiar under her thick fingers. She closed her eyes, remembering her father's hands guiding hers. Slide the left panel up. Push the bottom corner in. Rotate the base clockwise. Click, click, click. The wooden panels slid apart. With a final twist, the top popped open. Inside, resting on faded red velvet, was a sleek silver USB flash drive. Carter's eyes lit up with unholy greed. "Give it to me," he demanded. But Beatrice didn't hand it over. She pulled the drive out, letting the empty wooden box fall to the wet pavement. She looked Carter dead in the eyes. "You called me a fat, sloppy waitress," Beatrice said, her voice entirely devoid of fear. "You think my body makes me weak. You think I'm nothing." "Just hand over the drive, you stupid cow," Carter snarled, stepping forward. Before Carter could blink, a deafening crack echoed through the courtyard. Carter screamed, falling to his knees as blood exploded from his right shoulder. Behind Lorenzo, on the hospital roof, red laser sights from Lorenzo's sniper detail painted the chests of every tactical officer. "Drop your weapons!" a voice boomed from the hospital entrance as a dozen of Lorenzo's heavily armed enforcers poured out, outflanking the corrupt police. Carter clutched his bleeding shoulder, staring up at Beatrice in utter shock. Beatrice looked down at the silver flash drive, the key to the underworld, the chain tying Lorenzo to his father's violent past, and the target endangering her mother. With unapologetic defiance, Beatrice dropped the drive onto the wet asphalt. She lifted her foot, bringing her heavy, thick-soled work shoe down onto the silver metal with the full, devastating force of her weight. Crunch. The drive shattered into a dozen irreparable pieces, crushed completely beneath her boot. Carter wailed in despair, realizing his power had just been obliterated by the woman he had openly mocked. Lorenzo let out a low, rough laugh of absolute adoration. He holstered his weapon and walked over to Beatrice, completely ignoring the bleeding detective and the standoff. Lorenzo wrapped his massive arms around her wide waist, pulling her heavy, perfect body flush against his chest. He buried his face in her wet hair, kissing her neck, her jaw, and finally her lips, tasting the undeniable victory on her mouth. You destroyed it, Lorenzo murmured, his voice filled with awe. You freed me from my father's ghost. No one dictates our future, Lorenzo, Beatrice whispered back, resting her hands on his broad chest, realizing her immense strength. And no one will ever make me feel small again. Never, Lorenzo vowed, his dark eyes burning with eternal devotion. He swept her up into his arms, carrying her effortlessly toward the hospital doors to see her mother, leaving the ruined remnants of the city behind them in the rain. The destruction of the Romano ledger didn't just bring down a corrupt detective. It shattered the invisible chains of the city's underworld, leaving Lorenzo and Beatrice to rule a new empire built on absolute loyalty. Beatrice proved that true power isn't about fitting into society's narrow molds, but about having the heavy, unapologetic strength to crush those who try to keep you down. What did you think of Beatrice's brilliant final move? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with all your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling stories. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update.